Yeah, just thought about my sort of dinner and you handed over sort of to me, but I think we've got about an hour. It is a very distinguished dog, completely created by AI. And as we go along sort of today, you'll probably spot some other sort of AI sort of creations sort of going through. But really pleased to be here. So my name's James. I'm Director of Health Informatics at Rotherham NHS Foundation Trust. I sit on the board. Some of you might know a colleague of mine, Lisa Fox, who's part of this sort of community. Just a very sort of brief background, been in NHS for 32 years. And I've been trying to get out for about 31. Worked predominantly across West and sort of South Yorkshire. Last 10 years at Rotherham, and then worked in sort of West Yorkshire and stuff. So I'm a sort of computer scientist sort of by background, but I'm not a large language model AI sort of specialist. So what I'm going to run through today is within my organisation, we provide a number of sort of learning paths around AI and generative AI and large language models, and some of that's classroom based, some of that's virtual, some of that's sort of hands-on and all that sort of stuff. We've been doing that for probably about sort of 2 or 3, we'll be into our sort of 3rd year sort of now. So one of the things we do is a Gen AI 101 sort of course. And for those that don't know, 101 is the George Orwell 1984 sort of thing. And sometimes it feels like we should stick this thing into a secret room that nobody's allowed to sort of talk about. So this is normally a 4-hour talk, so with some breaks. Yeah, I'm not going to be 4 hours. I'm going to try and get this down to sort of 50 minutes. I'll probably speed some things up really, really fast. And what I want to do is near the end as well is be really brave and do some sort of live sort of demos of some stuff we do in our organisation where we're using this technology in a safe way to help with some of the sort of the work that we sort of do. Fingers crossed that works well. And I've been practicing a few times to try and sort of get it sort of right. So by all means, as we go along, anything comes up, raise your hand. I'll try and keep an eye out. I can see everybody's on my other sort of screen. I'll keep an eye out and sort of chat. If I don't notice, by all means, just unmute and just shout really loud, and I'll hear it. But try and make this as interactive over the medium of Teams as much as we can. So I guess without sort of further ado, so we started this course, like I said, probably in this time in 24. So yeah, 3 years ago actually. Feels like every time we do this sort of course, the slides are really, really out of date, and that's super important. And I'm sure everybody in the sort of course sort of today is that this is changing at such a pace. It's really difficult to sort of keep up with it. But what we're going to do is we're going to start by sort of grounding in a little bit of actual background, and we're going to go sort of way back in terms of, so when people talk about AI isn't a new thing at all. And if you want to, there's some really good sort of YouTube videos from the Francis Crick Institute around its AI, Institute of AI in sort of England. You can watch that. They did a Christmas lecture about 3 years ago. Amazing. If you really want a good deep academic sort of background to some of this sort of stuff, and we've pinched some of their sort of talk on here sort of today. But yeah, so be good while I talk, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, is just what your current experience with AI and large language models are. If anybody's got access to Copilot chat in their organisation, it'd be good sort of to know. Do any of you pay for your own large language model? So your own subscription to ChatGPT or Gemini or any of that sort of stuff. Be really good to know. So keep an eye on the chat, and I'll probably change some of the talk as we sort of go along. I did this. I'm reminded I did this talk also to our HR department. There's about 80 of them, and I asked them that same question, and they all put their hand up. I didn't know whether to be like really pleased or really, really scared that all of HR department are all using sort of ChatGPT to do stuff. Good, but most of us, I'm sure, will be experiencing this at some point in our either work or sort of home lives now. So AI as a thing, as a discipline, started really after sort of World War II, but became much more prevalent around the sort of early sort of 50s with a guy called John McCarthy, and really sort of focusing on, can we use machines to help us with problem solving, so rule-based sort of problem solving. And over time, that's transformed and changed into something called, and I'll use lots of sort of tech acronyms as a glossary terms at this sort of end, in terms of something called generative adversarial networks. But things really start to sort of take off in this sort of sphere. Anybody heard of Deep Blue? Google Deep Blue, all that sort of stuff. You might have heard that they trained Deep Blue to really complicated game called Go, which is a sort of Chinese sort of game, but they essentially trained Deep Blue how to play Go, and it can actually be like they sort of grandmaster, same sort of chess. But what really sort of came out probably around sort of 5 or 6 years ago is this idea of, it's quite a techy sort of phrase, generative pre-trained transformers. So what, in essence, these are the bedrocks of large language models, and that's essentially when we use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a large language model doing maths. That's, if you're going to take anything away from today, this is all about maths and probability. And as I said, not much else. There's lots else, but it's fundamental how these work. But what's happened, certainly in the last decade, 10 years, is the amount of compute we have as a planet at our disposal and the amount of corpus or information text we have at our disposal has grown exponentially. So the vast majority of the text on inside, in the internet is accessible, and we've got big, massive data centers that can, churn through that and pre-train their models. So fundamentally, general purpose transformers. So when we say ChatGPT, that's what that really means, is you're chatting with a general purpose transformer. Yeah, so these general purpose transformers that we are chatting with are at their core mathematical models that use probability to predict what should come next in a sequence. And those predictions have been built, and those probabilities have been built by consuming and analyze the corpus of the internet. So they get fed all the stuff that's in the internet, and I'll talk a little bit later about different sort of modes of the internet. So it's not just text now, it can be image, and it can be sort of videos. They're fed all that, and they change their probability in terms of what happens next as a result. And then I think it was November 23, might be a bit sort of later, so OpenAI, which started as an open source venture with a guy called Elon Musk, which you might have heard of, and all that sort of stuff. They released something called ChatGPT 3 to essentially to the internet and to the social media, and it's just rocketed sort of since. And that was their version 3 model. Likes of Google and Microsoft and others have been at this for a considerable amount of time as well. So the rise of these models really started around sort of 2020, but certainly in my own world, it's sort of got some real traction around of Christmas of let's say sort of 2022. And then let me just move that across a little bit. The sort of headlines are everywhere out there. Am I right in saying not a day goes by these days where we hear about something called AI having some impact sort of somewhere or doing something? There's talk of AI, taking sort of jobs over, being used for predicting really sort of bad things about what's happening over in the sort of Middle East at the sort of moment. Across the NHS, I think our ministers and sort of nationally, we've really latched on to this idea that AI could help some of the productivity problems that the NHS constantly sort of sees. True story for you. So back in, and this relates to some of the sort of fears with sort of new technology. So back in the early 70s, bear with me, in New York, which incidentally, I don't know if there's any Americans on the sort of call, but American, particularly in the sort of eastern states, is quite a unionized sort of workforce. It's probably more unionized than we are. The Association of American Accountants in New York in 1971 threatened to go on strike across the whole of New York. So accountants went on strike because the Japanese were bringing in this new technology, which would take all their jobs. And that new technology was called, we now call the Casio calculator. So they were going to go on strike because calculators were going to get rid of accountants. There are now more accountants in New York than there ever has been. So calculators, this technology didn't get rid of accountants, it actually created more. And I personally think this technology that's coming through to a bit Wild West will actually probably generate more types of jobs and roles, probably jobs and roles that we can't sort of dream of today. But the net effect will be a bigger and more adaptable sort of workforce rather than a sort of smaller one. You know, we don't have many steam engine engineers in the UK or many sort of that's probably for the right reasons. So you know, job roles sort of change over time. But the NHS is going for AI, something called the 10-year plan, which you might have read. You can, you know, it's online. The organisation you work in would have been submitting investment based to something called frontline productivity in the last couple of weeks. And in there is asks around your strategies and plans around AI adoption in your organisation. So a lot of us are sort of focusing around this, and you know, I and a number of colleagues nationally, but our jobs really is to get our workforce, our specialists and people ready to embrace this technology and actually, you know, leverage it for its good. So a little bit of background, how AI seems to be all over the sort of place at the sort of moment. It's on your phones, it's everywhere. In fact, prepping for this presentation just this morning, Apple CarPlay, turned on Copilot and chatted to Copilot while driving down the sort of motorway, sort of hands-free, just checking what's in the sort of presentation. So you know, I couldn't have done that a year ago. So let's get into a little bit of detail about how more depth weeds about how some of this sort of works. So again, all the images are created by AI. If you haven't already sort of guessed, these aren't real people in Rotherham. They don't look like that. We'll talk a little bit more about deep neural networks, large language models, something about tokens and prompt engineering. So again, if you're going to take something away, remember what these things called tokens are, because they absolutely determine how you get the best out of some of these tools, and also some of its limitations. There was when ChatGPT first came out, if you asked it how many R's, so that's my dulcet Yorkshire tone, so Riffer Rawlinson, how many R's in the word strawberry, it never, ever got it right. It couldn't get it right. And actually, hopefully after today, you'll realise why that's the case. You know, because you know, statistically, it could never have got it right anyway. But there are things to know about. So going back to a little bit of history again. So this slide, really busy, but gives you a sense of how neural networks were sort of conceptualized just after the war. Some of them might have heard of Alan Turing. And that progressed somewhat into something called neural sort of networks. Now, up until fairly recently, these were all worked on the idea that to determine the next step, look at what's gone on previously, and that works out where you go sort of next. Back propagation is really fundamental to anybody who's Google Maps or Apple Maps to get about. You know, that's sort of more or less neural networks and back propagation in action. So, so you've been using that for ages. And me as a director of health informatics, I am a bit sniffy about this. So when people say AI is new, it's not. So you know, I do get a bit wound up sometimes when I go on sort of talks and people essentially have used back propagation networks or machine learning, and you know that stuff's been around for ages. And you know, jobs we do as analysts and that sort of stuff isn't sort of new. It's a new sort of way sort of to do it. And then in the sort of late 90s, the good example of where the US Postal Service applied the concept of neural networks to start to understand handwriting, particularly zip codes, which zip codes are the US equivalent of postcodes. So essentially, they start to sort of train these models of these neural networks to be able to understand imagery, at that time, sort of handwriting. But they were limited really in terms of they could only do one thing. So the postcode, zip code, handwriting recognition could only ever do that. You give it a piece of sort of handwritten, sort of I'm left-handed, my handwriting is terrible. You give it a piece of my handwriting and some notes for a meeting. It had no idea of how to sort of cope with that. So the very sort of single, bespoke, one job at a sort of time. And if any of the sort of computer scientists among you, essentially going back to the concept of neural networks, it really sort of stemmed for in how neuroscience sort of works. So this idea of how our sort of brain sort of works and how we connect different. The brain's a lot more complicated, but through mathematics we can connect different probabilities of events together. So what's a good example? There's a nursery rhyme, the cat jumped over the lazy. So most people can probably guess what the follow-on word for that is. So the cat jumped over the lazy fox. So it's not going to be the cat jumped over the lazy sandwich or the lazy banana, or there's lots of things it's not going to be. So there's a high probability when you see that string of words what the next one is going to be, and that's at its core how neural networks operate. And these neural networks, because of the corpus of this internet, are based on billions of parameters. So 70 billion parameter models now are out and about. So the way I sort of visualize a 70 billion parameter model, imagine an Excel spreadsheet with 70 billion columns. A billion columns, so 70,000 million columns. I struggle with 12 or 20. That's how broad these things are. So this side here sort of helps us think about this idea of sort of tokens. So as I said previously, backpropagation is a mathematical model where you work out what you do next based on what's happened previously, and then you can add weightings to those things. So weightings are a way of saying this next step is more prevalent or more likely to happen to compared to another sort of step. And that's how, particularly in the early days of large language models, early days, 2 years ago, when you type some things into some of these sort of things, you can see sort of, well, it's not thinking, but you can see sort of pause between sentence and word sort of generation. And what it's doing there is using backpropagation to work out what word to use next. So really fundamental. What you feed into it, it figures out how to do next. If you give some of these things, and you've probably experienced it yourself, really broad, give me an idea, for those that have got maybe ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, if you just typed in there now, give me an idea, the randomness of what it will give you would be enormous. Yeah. But if you said, I don't know, you are a AphA member who works in the NHS in the west of England, then give me an idea. It will essentially using neural networks and backpropagation to figure out what's the most likely set of letters and text that we want as a result of that. And you can apply that same process to images. So as well as text, backpropagation neural networks, you can apply to images. And I don't know if anybody's had a play yet, but there are an increasing number of models now that can generate videos. And essentially videos are 50 images a second all interlaced together. That's what creates a video. So it's doing all the text and the imagery stuff really, really fast. Push it all together, create a video. That's, I know, something nationally, sort of parliament sort of level. Lots of people think about where does this go? Where does this stop? Basically, from image generation. And some of the sort of feedback, some of the questions from you guys was around safe to use, and when we can't use some of these sort of models. Large language models such as Grok have no what we call guardrails. So Grok was owned by X, which is owned by Elon Musk and sort of Twitter. They don't necessarily have guardrails inside their sort of system that prevents users from doing things that we would class in sort of UK as being unacceptable. Whereas Microsoft Copilot, which is advocated, the NHS Microsoft Copilot has lots and lots of guardrails in there. Can sometimes be a bit too much. So we're doing something in Rotherham where we're summarising or looking at how we can sort of summarise some clinical correspondence. And Microsoft Copilot struggles a little bit with things like our child and adolescent service. It thinks actually the worst of that sort of text, when actually it's a service that we sort of provide. Breast surgery doesn't go down very well in Microsoft sort of Copilot either, because the guardrails are probably sort of too specific in healthcare. So yeah, large language models are built on DNNs. Generative AI is a new sort of phrase that we use to describe what LLMs do, transformers, billions and trillions of training sort of data. There's a whole ethical question about training data, and I think I might have heard it on a podcast this morning. It could be in America or over here. Some changes to the law about protecting copyright. So if you write a book, copyright shows. At the moment, most large language models are free to use that sort of content without seeking your sort of permission. And there have been some cases, I believe, again in the sort of States, where the large language models have not updated their training database. So I think it's an individual somewhere in Delaware where he was convicted of murder, but then retried and found not guilty. Large language models still say that person's convicted of murder and is serving a prison sentence, and that's just not correct. And this whole ethical thing about who's your take sort of caught with that sort of stuff. Okay, so I did update this slide this morning. It was out of date. So ChatGPT is on version 5.2. There's a free subscription, free version, or you can subscribe about £20 a month sort of thing. Anthropic, which is my personal sort of go-to, which is used Claude and Sonnet, really good for sort of coding, sort of data analysis. We at Rotherham pay for a enterprise license for Anthropic, which has more guardrails around it. Microsoft Copilot Chat. I'm just looking on the call. Everybody here has got an NHS email address, so you've all got free access to that. And it's got some limitations, but it's pretty good, and it's got those strong NHS guardrails around it. Pretty good, and gets better probably every couple of weeks. That's some of my experience. I quite thought it was rubbish last year, but actually it's not bad now. Google Gemini 3.1, which is just amazing, particularly for speech and sort of video. And then there's hundreds of other models. One quite famous one is the Chinese sort of DeepSeek, which is really, really cheap and really, really sort of fast. But it is a Chinese model, and when you use a public version, you have no idea what you type in, what they do with that sort of data. And that sort of applies to a lot of these things. One thing to want to sort of go through is this idea of sort of context window. So these large language models, when you interact with them, they are limited by the size of the context you give them. So context is the combination of all the text you give it as part of, say, some analysis and all its response. So the more you chat with it, the more consumption of context is used. Why that's really, really important is because the size of the context window, or the size of the stuff you can upload, can actually determine the quality of what you sort of get out. 2 years ago, these context windows were really, really, really small. But as I've got on the sort of chart here, sort of Gemini and Google and Anthropic, their context windows are now approaching what's called 1 million tokens. Now, tokens instead of something to sort of go through. So the way these models work is they chunk up words and sort of sentences and things into blocks of text, then do the probability bit. So, for example, the word strawberry, it doesn't see strawberry as its entirety. It chunks it up into, I think they all done slightly differently. It's called, getting really geeky, but called embeddings. But so they'll split the word strawberry into different portions and figure out actually what comes next from that. Those are each portion's a token. So roughly the whole of the sort of Harry Potter book is around 750,000 words, which is about millions of tokens. 2 years ago, you could get nowhere near that. Now you can. And there's lots of people talking about actually this could be growing exponentially. What does that mean? Could well mean we're not far away of being able to connect these large language models to massive internal sort of data sets and do stuff with it. I don't think we're that far away from that sort of stuff at all. We've got to do it safe and all that sort of stuff. And that would open up a whole different sort of world of sort of opportunities. But if you've got your own sort of paid version of ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, etc., sometimes you might come across it saying it won't do anything anymore. Your subscription's expired, or come back at sort of 10 o'clock, and that's a combination of sort of tokens, and also these are running from massive sort of data centers, and they want to sort of control how much data is being sort of used through those data centers. So they're the popular ones. I think there's about 200 or 300 available sort of large language models now. Some of them are free. You can actually download some of these onto your own computers and run them directly. Meta on Facebook, Llama is their open source large language model. You can download that if you've got a big enough computer and run this yourself. I won't be too surprised if the NHS has a go at doing that on its own as well pretty soon. Check the time, 12:30. Okay, tokens I've talked about, splitting up. So it creates a mathematical representation of those splitting of sort of words or an image. Creates a tokenizer, then uses those mathematical representations for probability. I'll keep on saying it, but probability. These things work on probability. Yeah, they are. It's not a guess. For the statisticians amongst you, probabilities are guesses. But they're very much like a guess. They are using maths to predict what it thinks should come next. So it doesn't have its own sentiment thinking. It's using maths to predict things. Okay, each large one has the liminal tokens, etc., etc. Oops. Did I just go forward one there? Okay, and so but more something new, it's a fairly new sort of term, which is prompt engineering. So the thing you type into ChatGPT and as a Copilot, we call that prompt. So you're prompting it to do something. There is now, you can go on university courses for prompt engineering. How you craft that prompt significantly changes the quality of what you get out. So if you're going to be using these things more and sort of more, I would think about going away and having a look at sort of prompt engineering. And there are various sort of frameworks of how to create prompts. One that I particularly like using is something called Cisco, but that's where when you prompt something, the first thing you do is you tell it to act as. Now, I want you to act as an NHS healthcare analyst professional. Then go to do something. It's a very different output to I want you to act as a painter and decorator, then do something. You'll get something very, very sort of different, grounding what you want. You can tell these models about what type of output you want, what type of style and tone, because again, it just uses maths and probability to figure that out. For some reason, I've never really got it to do sort of like dulcet Yorkshire tone sort of phrases yet, but maybe that will come at sort of some point. They always seem to think I'm some sort of a highly excited American when I do these sorts of things. But that's probably me having to do more work on my sort of prompt. But prompt engineering is a thing. It's getting more and more sort of prevalent. And indeed, you can get large language models to help you create prompts. One other technique I've found and seen other people particularly sort of useful is when you're prompting these things, ask it for any points of clarification. So type in your prompt and the use, for instance, if you are not sure of anything, ask me and I will answer one at a time. Actually, that grounds it back. It's really, really useful. And also, I find it quite useful. I quite like sort of telling it off because you can tell these things off and they don't bite back. I'm always apologetic. But yeah, telling it sort of, no, you've got this wrong actually, because it's maths and probability helps it going sort of forward as well. So don't be afraid of telling these things off. Okay, so yeah, so some good as part of the course that we do in Science at Rotherham, we give some examples of what are bad prompts and what sort of good prompts and why. So yeah, top 10 grossing movies, fill your boots. Yeah, everybody in this call today typed in that. We will get some quite different answers. Some will be UK grounded, some will be from different sort of years, some will be different types of sort of movies and things. So the more information we can give into a prompt, the better. And remember, prompt helps with your prompt contributes to context. These contexts are getting bigger and bigger. So you can upload quite large sort of data sets these days to help with a prompt. Okay, so yeah, what's this say? Yeah, okay. So yeah, poor quality bad prompt engineering. Sometimes they make mistakes. People got examples of hallucinations where these things just mess stuff up. I would always say human in the loop. In fact, there's a one of the politicians who went for the Dalton and whatever sort of by-election quite recently has wrote a book that's been found out is used ChatGPT to write quite a lot of it. These models are pretty good at predicting or working out if themselves have wrote the text you give it as well. Because it's maths, because it's mathematics and probability, you can actually spot that at scale. So it's quite straightforward to be able to do that. I would always advocate something we call human in the loop. So unless it's doing a really, really small type of sort of task, just a binary type sort of task where it can either be right or wrong, then I absolutely advocate sort of human in the loop type checking of what the output is. There's a whole debate going on at the moment in healthcare in our business that we work in around if we're using large language models to do things like ambient voice technology, where it's listening to a conversation. So you can say a doctor in a clinic and a member of the public, and it's create a summary of that. If there's something wrong in that summary, who is liable? GMC are really clear, the individual doctor is liable. Because the individual has used the tool to do something, and you are responsible for that tool use. You can't necessarily blame the tool in its own sort of right. I think that will sort of stay, but I think these tools will get sort of better and better. There are some large language models that are being trained, particularly around sort of healthcare and clinical coding. They're quite exciting. They deeply understand SNOMED, and they've been trained to do. So these general purpose models don't do negatives very well. So if you tell them not to say something, often they will just say it anyway, because again, it's mathematics. It doesn't understand not and the word after. It's just maths. It's regression planning, that sort of thing. So doing that in healthcare. So James did not present with COPD. Sometimes can actually think I've got COPD because the words presented in COPD were present. Oops. Yeah, and then massive computational power. So OpenAI, who own ChatGPT, they 18 months ago did a round of sort of funding, and they received the planet's largest ever single sort of source of round funding ever. So there's lots and lots of money being pumped into these organisations. They received massive computational power. NVIDIA, who are a chip manufacturer, their share price has rocketed over the last sort of couple of years because a lot of these large language models use specific chips, GPU, graphical processing unit chips that are optimized for mathematical statistics. and they've gone through the roof. So if you had loads of Nvidia sort of shares 4 or 5 years ago, you're probably a geeky gamer and now actually a multimillionaire. However, it does present some problems in terms of, this can't rise exponentially, particularly with the likes of sort of big countries like America and sort of China. And then lastly, a lot of these large language models, they are black box type technology, so they don't always release publicly in terms of particularly what guardrails or what own prompts they use to determine the outcomes that they sort of generate. So that's normally that takes about an hour and a half. I think I've done it in 30 minutes, but I'll pause there. Then I'm going to do the exciting bit. Some demos of how I've used this, or we've used this in our organisation. But any thoughts, feedback, any questions? Hope you enjoy your dinner. People got Copilot, I can sort of see that. Use Copilot at home. Good, useful. Cheers, my dinner. All right, okay. Let's do the bit that makes or breaks. So that prompt, that image you've seen through the presentation was created using that prompt there. So that's the sort of level of detail to put into some of these. If you want to create images using large language models, Google's Nano Bananas, excellent, really, really good. ChatGPT is trying to catch up, but Google Nano Banana 3.1, really, really good. Anybody come across something called Google Notebook LM? Amazing. So it's a free product from Google, particularly if you've got a Google account called Google. I've got links in sort of further down. So what Google Notebook LM does is it's a website you go in, use your Google account, you can upload or web links or YouTube videos or whatever it is. Maybe it's a new standards definition from NHS England, new. And if I showed you mine, then you might see some of that. You can upload these as quite large chunky sort of PDFs and ask it questions specifically around the information you've uploaded. So it's like your own personalized language model. But what you can also do with Notebook LM is ask it to sort of create presentations on sort of data and information. And I'll give you an example using another model. And we've done that for some staff survey work in Rotherham fairly recently. Okay, so this is a bit where, say, crack open your laptops and we get interactive, and when we do our general AI 101, we say to people we're going to make you sort of software developers and data analysts in the next sort of 20 minutes. And people's faces sort of drop, but I can't do that now, so you have to sort of bear with us while we try to do this over sort of Teams. So if you've not got access to if you've not heard of Microsoft Copilot Chat, so if you've got an NHS mail address, I'll paste it in the chat now. And you click on this link and log in. It should somewhere guide you to log in with your nhs.net credentials. And so Microsoft Copilot Chat has been enabled for 1.6 million people across the NHS. No, it's internal course only. Sorry, Alana. We could make it externally. Don't see why not. Good idea. So yeah, so Copilot Chat's enabled to everybody across the NHS. It's got some context limitations. So you've heard me talk about context. So when you want to do some analysis of files, I think you can only upload 3 or something. And then the sort of full Microsoft Copilot, which some of you might have on the sort of call, is a paid for license. Currently, a large number of trial licenses. Speak to your CIO or whoever it is in your organisation and try and get your hands on some. What that then allows you to do is look at all your sort of OneDrive files, SharePoint, emails, team messages. So it's got a broader access to more information. It's pretty good. We were recording today, so the transcript will be created. The transcript is created by OpenAI's large language model. Everybody sort of gets that. You sort of see that. If you had full blown Microsoft Copilot, you could then tell it to create a detailed, I don't know, you are an expert in creating IT training guides. Please create me a training guide of everything you have heard in this transcript, and it'll just bang that out. Or create me a PowerPoint presentation of everything you've sort of heard today. Increases sort of people can sort of do that. We're finding that really useful for non-clinical type of sort of work. Training guides, documentation, processes. Our data scientists are starting to use these things where you can give it a sort of data model and ask it to create its own documentation. So rather than don't know about you, chaps, but I'm one of these people who really suffer from blank page syndrome. If you give me a blank page, I really struggle. I don't know, it's just bloody engineering in me. But if you give me something to start with, I can work generally really well with that. I find this really useful to do. It gets me going with some sort of things. So training guides, answers to complex sort of questions. What else I've got on here? All right, okay. So while I'm chatting, if you have got a large language model open, I would be dead interested for you all to, in your large language model of choice, is not confidential, nothing sensitive. You can use ChatGPT, Copilot, any ones you can. Ask it to create a list of 10 highest grossing movies of all time, sorted by gross, and post it in the chat, and we'll see what differences everybody sort of has. But what we can do now with these tools, as well as asking that sort of question to go off and get the sort of data, you can start asking it to create sort of visualizations. And if I'm jumping ahead gun a little bit here, but so let me just try and change sharing around. So give me a second. Yeah, so this is Claude, which is Anthropic sort of model. Staff survey data. Everybody, yeah, you've all done your staff survey, and that's probably come through your organisations. So RFR is Rotherham. So I've uploaded our staff survey data. It's not, there's nothing sensitive or confidential. It is actually a publicly available sort of document. And I've told Claude to review locality sheet 1 and use statistical techniques to create me a stunning presentation of the areas with best scores and areas with the worst. And I don't know how viewable that is. Essentially, it's created me. I've not gone through this. I don't know how accurate it is. Zoom in the loop. I think these things do an increasingly good job of a high level sort of presentation of sort of data. But I often have to then get my calculator out and just double check actually what it's saying is that correct. We have used this in our organisation, a similar sort of model to do staff survey analysis. So our care groups and divisions and departments can go online and essentially interact with a large language model for the complete staff survey data. And we've also told it to give act as an organisation development psychologist and recommend 5 areas of improvement. Interesting what it sort of comes out of. Particularly for me as an organisation, it says our HR department need to focus on their morale, which is the iron is not lost on us. So yeah, so uploaded an Excel spreadsheet, told it specifically which sheet to analyse. Think about grounding using statistical techniques. So I didn't have to put that in, but I found that makes a massive difference. So, if we have a preference over which standard deviations or which other techniques we wanted to use, then that helps. So there's a question in the chat about do I find it sort of accurate? Well, it was. If you'd asked me sort of 2 years ago, I would say no, not always. But actually, I'm finding these things are getting increasingly accurate, and that's because the models and the context is getting sort of bigger and bigger. We're all professional analysts and things. Sometimes one number isn't the same anyway. When kind of bump back between average and medians and means and all that sort of stuff. As just one sort of example. But yeah, in our locality one, looks like we've done really well on different islands. Managers encouraged me at work, has done really bad, didn't get responses. So yeah, and then I could interact with it and ask it sort of further sort of questions. So that's one example of rough and ready, loading up some documentation, an Excel spreadsheet, this with some data in it, and then asking some questions and produce a presentation. If I did this in Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot, the visual presentation is even better than Claude in my experience. So that's one example. Let me go about 10 minutes left. In fact, many people use Power BI? I'll just go to one of the examples. So this is where I've used it. Let me just think how to, I'm going to share my whole screen. So it's a bit wide, so you might have to sort of zoom in a little bit, which is control and something else wheel. If I share my whole screen, I'll just show you something which we've done. Or which I've done anyway. So if I minimize all that, I don't think I get anything on this on my desktop. So I've got, by way of an example, Datix. People have probably got Datix. So we've got a Power BI model here that does some stuff for Datix. So this is what our corporate governance use. So I've installed an external tool called Tabular Editor 2.0, which is free. Tabular Editor 3, you have to sort of pay for. But what Tabular Editor does is enables you to create a textual representation of your Power BI model. What does that mean? So if I do file, save as, and then just give it a name, so model.bim. This model.bim file is a text file of all the tables, of all the relationships, of all the data types, all that sort of stuff.
We can't see your screen, James.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking like mad and nobody can see anything. Let me try again. What's that like?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So Power BI model for Datix, we're using our organisation, risk management. I'm sure lots and lots of you guys do. Datix is everywhere and needs to go from the NHS, but nobody will. Installed an external tool, so you can download it off the internet. It's called Tabular Editor. Download version 2, because version 3 you have to pay for. Download it, install it. In the background, it connects itself to Power BI. Click on Tabular Editor, and then what Tabular Editor enables you to do, amongst lots and lots of stuff, is save a textual representation of your Power BI model. So it doesn't save the data, it saves the model in the background. The file, save as, model.bim, save that. And then, so essentially it's creating a textual representation of this sort of data model. Good. Then this is where the sort of fun happens. So then what I can do is I can upload that file I've just created into, so this is Copilot Chat, which everybody's got access to. The only little trick you've got to do is, by default, the file ends in .mib. You've got to change that to end in .txt. Otherwise, Copilot won't let you upload it. So I've uploaded it. It's a TDML file. So I've told it what it is. Be very quick and summarize it for me. So it's summarized all that. It's picked out some tables. It's worked out relationships, all that sort of stuff. And then I've said, write me a so I've just made this up. Write me a DAX measure called MX notes. That shows me the risk where rep approved equals FA. For those that know Datix, is actually ones that are active. So active risks. That has the most number of notes. But whatever, I just chose something random. And then it's essentially created me a DAX query that allows me to do that, and why it all works. What you can also do is, and again, I've done this previously, screenshot the actual picture of the model itself. You can paste that in. So we were using this in our organisation when we first wanted to create the Power BI visualization for Datix. Datix is one of those systems where the database, in terms of tables and rows, don't really mean very much to human beings. It's actually, what the hell does that mean? I have no idea. But what you can do is connect, and that's beyond sort of time I've sort of got today. But what you can do is connect, likes of Anthropic or sort of Claude, direct to SQL, and get it to tell you how the data is all structured and sort of works, and increasingly does a good job. And then the last thing is the demo I just want to do, because I'm conscious of time now, is again Copilot chat. So I'm really blessed. Our data warehouse team and data scientist team are really good in terms of documentation. So all our documentation is in Microsoft Word in one SharePoint library online, and there's loads of this stuff. Really techie sort of geeky things. But what we're able to do, it's all free, part of my Copilot, is create an agent that can read all that documentation. So we use a electronic patient record system called Meditech. Write me a SQL query that extracts, I don't know, number of people over 48 years of age. Oops, age who were admitted in the last 3 weeks. I've not practiced this, by the way. I've no idea what it's going to do. But what it should do is go through our documentation. There's probably about 400 or 500 separate sort of Word documents. Try and then figure out how the data models all work, and then build me a SQL query that gives me a start for 10 and how to do that. If you're future thinking, I don't think we're that far away. I've said that a few times, where you'll be able to essentially connect a telephone line, a voice to this, and be able to ask it just that question. So we in our organisation have plumbed large language models into our IT service desk. So when you call the Rotherham IT service desk, it'll ask you what your problem is, what you're phoning about. It'll figure out whether you're chasing something up. But if it's a new problem, it'll dip into our knowledge base and say, hey, I think actually this might help your problem. Do you want to send you a copy of an email? We're seeing a near 35% reduction in IT service desk calls. The trick is to make sure the knowledge base is up to date. So there you go. So for those of you who don't know Meditech, they actually are some of our, I know that as a fact. That's probably correct to some degree, but it's as good. Right, I shall pause there. There were lots of, I tried to condense 4 hours into an hour. I've got about 4 minutes sort of left.
Yeah, that was well done.
I've stopped sharing. Happy to sort of take any questions, and sort of broader, chuck ideas around. Yeah. Over to you guys. Hope you found that to some degree interesting. Maybe learn a little bit.
There was a couple in the chat, James. I don't know if you, oh, there's a hand.
Oh.
Joe, want to go ahead?
Sorry, I've rescued you from the silence. Yeah,
thank you, Joe.
that was a really good presentation. It's really interesting to see how you've used AI. Definitely more forward than other places that I've seen. I'm just wondering, from a governance perspective, how did you get around governance discussions, and what did you put any policies in place or anything like that to enable you to get where you've got to safely?
Yeah, great question. So I'm really looking at that governance, particularly information governance sits under me. So I'm responsible for governance as well. So so what we've done in our organisation, we've created something we call the AI sort of subgroup that's chaired by one of our clinicians. So any new models or ways of working assistance, etc., we take that through a process in terms of it's the right sort of thing to do. We've adapted our IT acceptable use policy, so we've really hold back from creating an AI policy. And I'll tell you for why. So we've done that because absolutely no, by the time you write it, it goes through your organisation, it'd be so out of date, it'd be probably a bit of a laughing stock. So we didn't want to do that. So what we wanted to do is, I am old enough and increasingly bold enough to remember when this thing called Google appeared in the NHS, and I worked in a trust where the chief executive wanted to shut access to Google because she never knew what anybody were going to do with it. They were real, and we did for a bit actually. It was just ridiculous. So yeah, so we created an AI subgroup, we adapted some of our sort of policies, and then we've changed some of our training to reference Microsoft Copilot Chat. So Microsoft Copilot Chat has gone through lots of national sort of governance type sort of stuff with those guardrails and what it comes to use it for. What we've not done, and we still shine away a little bit from it, is done loads and loads around clinical things. I'm still a bit nervous about some of the examples I'm seeing where, yeah, crikey, if we get some, that's a bit blunt, if we get some numbers wrong, that's one thing. But if we make a clinical decision based on what AI said and it causes harm, I don't feel uncomfortable with that at the moment. So, Gen AI 101 course, education, awareness raising, I think contributes to a lot of that sort of stuff. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. That's really interesting. Just thinking about
Thanks, Julie.
harms, though. I'm just thinking about harms taxonomies. Have you done one of those?
Not yet, no, but I've heard someone sort of mentioned about building a sort of taxonomy. So of harms, and our AI subgroup were talking around should we build something where we get all our models to reference that in terms of its own sort of content. Is it that sort of thing you're thinking of?
Yeah, it's just about that that creating that database of awareness of what could go wrong, and then that enables you to account for it and decide what appetite of risk you want to put into your strategy and where that risk should sit, who owns it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great
Thank
question.
you.
Thank you.
I will
Thanks,
stop
Julie.
talking now. Thank you.
No worries, thanks. I think we have maybe time for one more question if someone has anything really
I'm
pressing.
just going through. Yeah, ChatGPT. Yeah, okay. Can't see any other sort of questions in the sort of chat, but Lisa Fox, who works for us as part of this sort of AphA network in sort of Yorkshire and sort of Humber, if there's any sort of further sort of stuff you guys sort of want from us, then just reach out via sort of Lisa. More than happy sort of to, so, and vice versa. If I can just finish off, my own view as a director of informatics who sits on our board. I think I'm the last one standing actually in the country now, which is a bit sad, but never mind. Is these tools will make our jobs even better, and I think even more sort of interesting actually, and open it out a little bit for us. I think they're good.
I think there was one question, James, about if the full course you were talking about, is that something that's available to people, or is that just for your
At the
team?
moment, we only do it ourselves internally because we turn people into software coders and data analysts who can create charts of highest grossing movies all the time. So I don't know how useful that is, but yeah, it's only available internally. But the slide deck I've gone through is a slide deck, so I'll share that out. That's just not a problem at all.
Perfect. And that will be on the AphA website, so people can look back at that after this. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us. And hopefully we will see you at the next one.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Enjoy lunch. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.